Hey there, reader. It is the week 4 wrap up, which means you're 4 weeks into this class, which means you're halfway there. So I hope that feels good, and I hope that things are going okay for you out there on the other side. And I hope that you enjoyed spending a little time with Tang Poetry this last week. I have slowly, over time, become a huge fan of classical Chinese poetry. That includes the poetry from the Tang period, but also the poetry that comes before and after. I was not automatically this way. When I first started studying this stuff, I felt like I really didn't get it, but I stuck with it, and other people helped me to see these poems in a way that has led to me really appreciating what the Chinese poets were up to for such a long time, for over 1,000 years. So I have a book sitting here. This is just called Classical Chinese Poetry. It's selected and translated by this guy, David Hinton. He's one of the premier, English language translators of classical Chinese poetry. This book has been on my nightstand, I don't know, maybe for 5, 6, 7 years. And it's not a book that I just read cover to cover. It's a book that I open up to wherever, and I read 1 or 2 of these short poems. I read them slowly. I read them more than once, but not for very long, maybe 20 minutes, before I'm going to bed, or, in the morning when I get up and make my cup of coffee. I like to start my day with something like this. It's been very good for me, in the sense that it's always been easy for me to get into a story, to get into characters, to get into conflict, to get into quests or goals, or anything that goes along with the narrative mode of being in the world. But I've had to spend some time intentionally trying to learn this lyric mode of being in the world, which maybe the simplest way of saying it is that with narrative, it's all about what you do. But with lyric, it's about learning how to just be. How to just be in the world. And the Tang poetry, and lyric poetry in general, has really helped me in terms of being able to sit still, to be at peace, and to be really drawn to just the beauty of the natural world, or the beauty of whatever moment I find myself in. So I'm very grateful for the time that I've spent with the Chinese poets, and I hope that maybe you felt a little bit of that too this last week. So up on the screen is the cover of the book that I sent the introduction out to you. So this book is called 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei, with more ways, and it's by Elliot Weinberger. Elliot Weinberger is an excellent translator, and he's an excellent critic. He has a really nice way of calling your attention to details that are maybe easy to miss, but once you've seen them, change the way you look at whatever the piece of literature is that you're looking at. I sent out the introduction, and then, I told you to take a stab at translating a Tang poem. Obviously, this was an impossible challenge. There's no way that there's no way that I have the background knowledge and information that I need to really do this well. But the point wasn't, to sort of judge you based on your ability to get it right. It was more to give you an opportunity to feel a little bit what translators go through all the time, which is a sensitivity to the fact that, wow, even just changing 1 or 2 words really changes the meaning of this sentence, or it really just changes the feel of the sentence, or it totally changes the image that I'm trying to get across. The hope would be that an exercise like this could help you have a better appreciation for how difficult it is and what an accomplishment it is to state something in language or in writing clearly and concisely and accurately. Yeah. So what I want to do right now is just show you a few examples of how the poem that you worked with has been translated by professional translators. Again, you know, you won't help but be able to compare yourself to them, but it's not a fair comparison because these are people who've been studying Chinese language and Chinese culture for decades. So this book has a bunch of chapters. Each one begins with a different translation of the same poem, the poem that you worked with. Here's the translation from Burton Watson, who was the author of that article that you read that was called Tang Poetry, A Return to Basics. He's, again, a really important person in the West in terms of advocating for and providing good quality English translations of Chinese literature. So here's Burton Watson's version. Deer Fence. Empty hills, no one in sight, only the sound of someone talking. Late sunlight enters the deep wood, shining over the green moss again. And let's see what Eric Weinberger has to say. Watson is a prolific and particularly fine translator of classical Chinese poetry, history, and philosophy. He is comparable in this century only to Arthur Waley, who unfortunately never translated this poem. He's also the first scholar whose work displays an affinity with the modernist revolution in American poetry. Absolute precision, concision, and the use of everyday speech. We'll skip this next paragraph. Watson here renders the first two characters of line 1 with two words. No article, no explanation. Empty hills. His presentation of the image is as direct as the Chinese. There are 24 English words, 6 per line, for the Chinese 20. Yet every word of the Chinese has been translated without indulging, as other translators have done, in a telegraphic minimalism. In the translation of Chinese poetry, as in everything, nothing is more difficult than simplicity. It's an interesting line. Yeah. In the translation of Chinese poetry, as in everything, nothing is more difficult than simplicity. More than arrangement of tones, rhymes, and number of characters per line, Chinese poetry, like all ancient poetries, is based on parallelism, what I asked you to try and put some thought into this week. The dual, yin-yang, nature of the universe. Wang's first two lines are typical. See no people, no one in sight, but hear people. That's an example of parallelism. It's not saying the same thing, it's a contrast. No one in sight, only the sound of someone. No one, someone. Sight, sound. He even repeats the character for people. Watson retains Wang's parallelism effortlessly, no one to someone, yet he is the first translator to do so. Watson preferred hills to mountains and fence in the title to park or enclosure. This may be because, in Wang's painted scroll, the landscape is more hilly than mountainous, and the deer are indeed enclosed by a fence. So you're probably hearing this and thinking, wait, Wang's painted scroll? What the heck is that? So Deer Park, or Deer Enclosure, or Deer Fence, is part of a whole sequence of poems that Wang Wei did that were based on little locations on his estate. And he arranged all of these into a series of poems that could be hung in one room, like a gallery, the way you would hang art in a gallery. So then the viewer would move from scroll to scroll, and at each spot, stopping to look at the scroll, he or she would read the poem, and it would almost be like you were standing at a certain spot on Wang Wei's property, seeing that part of the property, and then it would be cumulative. You can imagine a little bit like if you were looking through like a coffee table book that was, showing you a national park or something like this, and every time you turn the page, you see another, image or picture of some part of the park, and over time, you get a better idea for the whole place. Let's look at another translation. Let's go and look at something very different. Let's do Gary Snyder's down here. You can see immediately that it looks different. Empty mountains, no one to be seen. Yet, here, human sounds and echoes. Returning sunlight enters the dark woods, again shining on the green moss above. Weinberger writes, surely one of the best translation, partially because of Snyder's lifelong forest experience. Gary Snyder spent a lot of time hiking, camping, and rock climbing in the Sierra Nevadas. Like Kenneth Rexroth, he can see the scene. Every word of Wang has been translated and nothing added, yet the translation exists firmly as its own American-style poem. Changing the passive verb is heard to the imperative here is particularly beautiful, and though unlikely, it is not strictly incorrect in terms of lining up with the grammar of the Chinese poem. It creates an exact moment, which is right now, giving us both meanings, sounds, and echoes for the last one word of the Chinese, is, like most sensible ideas, revolutionary. Translators usually assume that only one reading of a foreign word or phrase may be presented, despite the fact that perfect correspondence between the original and your new language is rare. The poem ends strangely. Snyder takes the last word, which everyone else has read as on, and translates it with its alternative meaning in Chinese, which is to say above, isolating it from the phrase with a comma. So what's going on? Moss presumably is only above if one is like a rock or a bug. Or are we meant to look up after seeing the moss back towards the sun? In answer to my query, Snyder wrote, the reason for moss above is that the sun is entering the woods in sunset and illuminating some moss up in the trees, not on the rocks. That is how, Gary Snyder says, his teacher saw it. It's also how his wife saw it, and the first time she looked at the poem. The point is that translation is more than a leap from dictionary to dictionary. Boy, if I'd have you learn anything from this class, it would be that. Translation is much more than a leap from dictionary to dictionary. It's a reimagining of a poem or a moment or an instance. As such, every reading of every poem, regardless of language, is an act of translation. Translation into the reader's intellectual and emotional life. As no individual reader remains the same, each reading can become different, not merely another reading. The same poem cannot be read twice. Snyder's explanation is only one moment, the latest, when the poem suddenly transforms before our eyes. Wang's 20 characters remain the same, but the poem continues in a state of restless change. So interesting. Let's go look at one more from Wang Wei. This is going to be from the How to Read Chinese Poetry podcast, an excellent resource if anyone out there is just inspired because you thought, wow, these poems were cool, I think I want to learn more. I highly encourage you to go and spend some time here. Each one of these episodes, when you get down here, is about 20 minutes long, 20 to 30 minutes long, 15 to 30 minutes long. Usually they do one or two poems. They have a reading of it in Chinese, and they have a discussion. They they have also a reading of it in English translation, and then they have a discussion of it. This starts with much older poetry that's like 2,000 years old, but it goes through the Tang poets and then up, I think, to about the 15th or 16th century. You were reading, here we go, from Du Fu and Li Bai. I know our book has Li Bo, but it's the same person. And here's episode 29, Wang Wei. This is a different poem. This is Zhongnan Mountain. Taiyi Peak approaches heaven's capital. The linked mountains extend to the edge of the sea. White clouds, when I look back, converge. The greenish haze, once I walk in to see it, disappears. The divided regions, when seen from the middle peak, change. Shaded or in sun, the myriad valleys look different. I wish to find lodgings for the night in a dwelling of man. Across the brook, calling to a woodcutter. Let me show you a couple of things that you might not see immediately when you read this poem. The first line, Taiyi Peak approaches heaven's capital. So this line takes our attention upward. It establishes like a vertical axis, the mountain and heavens. The next line, the linked mountains extend to the edge of the sea. This takes our attention, or it establishes a horizontal axis, mountain going up to the heavens, and then the range extending sideways to the sea. White clouds, when I look back, converge. So a bunch happens right here. Suddenly, we've got the third axis, we have the z-axis. So we have verticality, horizontality, and now we have depth. Because evidently, the white clouds that I saw looked one way, but when I look back, when I turn and look back, they converge, they come together. So not only does the painting or the image gain depth, 3 dimensions, but it also gets the element of time here, moving through the scene. A greenish haze, once I walk into it, disappears. Divided regions, when seen from the middle peak, change. Shaded or in sun, the myriad valleys look different. Okay, the last line of each one of these 4 central lines, notice that we have like 2 lines, period, 2 lines, period, 2 lines, period, 2 lines, period. Each one of those is called a couplet. The 2 middle couplets finish with the words in Chinese, Hei, Wu, Yan, and Shu. In translation here, they are converge, disappear, change, different. This is like a little mini lecture in Buddhist and Taoist cosmology or philosophy. The idea that things come together, but then they also fall apart. And that all of life is a process of change and transformation, and that they may look different, but really in the end, all things converge. They come from the same place, they go back to the same place. And it's sort of built into the very structure of the poem. There's actually more to say about this, but I just want to have it up there for you to maybe leave open the door the fact that whatever you get from these poems with your first reading, stay aware of the fact that there's more to them. Sometimes a lot more going on. Now, again, don't expect yourself to be able to just see these things immediately, to be aware of them, without having some help, without being shown them by other people who have spent more time with this stuff. That's how it was for me. Like I said, I didn't get it at first, and I wouldn't even say that I get it now, but I get it more than I used to, and I like that these poems are here. I like that So many translators have put time and energy into this to give me access so that I can hear these voices from the other side of the planet from over 1,000 years ago. And I can encounter a couplet like this. I wish to find lodgings for the night in the dwelling of man, across the brook, calling to a woodcutter, which is maybe just strange. Like, who's this woodcutter? What is this, little stream all of a sudden? But, like, the second time I read this poem, I had this very strange experience that Wang Wei, wishing to find lodgings for the night in the dwelling of another person, calling across to the woodcutter on the other side of the stream, I just had this weird experience that, like, I was the woodcutter. And Wang Wei was there on the other side of the stream, like on the other side of the stream of time, if you will, still calling, still wishing to find somewhere to take up residence. And I was that person on the other side, hearing that voice, and maybe deciding whether or not I was going to invite Wang Wei to come and stay with me for a little while. What do you think? Can you give this guy lodgings for the night? Let a stranger into your space? Share hospitality with them? Take a look at whatever it is they have to show you? And for my part, I'm happy to. Alright, I'll see you all in the week 5 video.